I used to teach up until a couple of years ago. I used to teach at the local university,
Okay.
teaching teaching songwriting. And aside from those lessons, this was a question I would get often from young aspiring artists and writers. And the problem with this answer is some of it gets lost in the decades, and some of
Mhm.
it doesn't. Some things don't apply. Like we didn't have streaming back then. So it's a slightly different world.
Right.
But essentially, there are a couple of things that are the same. It seems like every time I made some progress was by like leaving my living room and
Mhm.
getting out into the world and being on a stage somewhere if I could grab it, because it's so easy to be a legend in your own living room,
Right.
you know. But you just put those things up on the shelves and they don't go anywhere. You actually have to go out there and stick your neck out. Almost as big a leap as it is to finish writing a song. I remember as a songwriter, I figured I was such a great songwriter, and I thought I haven't actually finished any one of these, have I? And the thing about finishing it is it's a commitment. You're saying that's the best I can do. When you leave them unwritten, you always tell people, yeah, I got big plans for this one,
Right.
and but actually write and say, yeah, that's the best I can do. What do you think? You know, it was a big step, just as was finding ways to get myself out there. And my first things was when I was at art school, I formed a band that became quite famous in psychedelic circles called Mandrake Paddle Steamer. They had one single called Strange Walking Man, which goes for absolute fortunes on the internet. I don't know why.
Mhm.
But maybe it's because it's the only one we did. It makes it that much more valuable.
Right.
Uh, So that was the first time that I experienced getting out of the garage and being on stage, getting you somewhere. Because basically what we did, we had a band, we were at art school, so we asked the art school, can we open for Pink Floyd or whoever it was playing then? And so that was the first gig. And then after that, we came up with this idea, which I'm sure is still an idea that works. We found a venue, if you could call it. It was actually a pub in a very dangerous part of London, Stratford
Oh,
at the time, if you were afraid of skinheads, which I was.
okay.
But it was called the Railway Tavern in Stratford, and we organised a thing where we said, "Listen, we'll if you let us have the room over the pub, which is a big enough room to
Yeah.
have bands in. Quite a few notable bands played there. We'll get a crowd." And they'll drink. That's the whole point of having a room over a pub, get people to drink. And I'm sure it was a little more complicated than that. But I seem to remember we printed up a bunch of posters. I can't honestly remember working too hard at distributing the posters, but I guess somehow it happened, and there was a word of mouth thing. So within a few weeks, our band, which was the only thing playing, and it was called Asgard, which is a name for the Asgard. It's something to do with Viking gods. I forget now. But
Mhm.
anyway, um, kind of a highfalutin name. The name was actually taken because after a few months we couldn't handle the door, and a guy came up to us, a little guy in short pants, and said, "Can I take care of this for you? Manage the club because you seem to have, you're going to have trouble playing at the club." And we said, "Yeah, you take it." His name was Paul Fenn, and it may be dead now, or maybe it became a big thing that I forgot about. But he turned it into the biggest booking agency in Europe at the time,
Oh.
called Asgard, our
Mhm.
name, which we never sued him for. But anyway, so we ran this club, and so what we really did was we created our own platform, our own stage where we could go and play our stuff, and
Right.
it just kind of worked. And really, the club wasn't the mean; it was the means to an end. Obviously, we wanted to go further than that and filling up a club with a lot of beer drinking hippies. But sooner or later, word gets around, and the way A&R departments worked, even back in the '60s, I guess this was. Some guy turns up and sees your band, and he sees you as his gateway into his future, and blah blah blah. So that's how we got signed to EMI Records.
Yep.
But it's all about getting out of your living room, getting on the stage, and doing what you do, no matter how bad it is. Because the funny thing is that kind of music is now popular because of its rawness and its badness.
Right.
And so if I had to do a remake of that stuff, I would totally polish it up and stylize it out the window. But that was the thing you didn't realize at the time, because at that time, when you're like a teenager, you get criticized most of the time for just for being who you are, for being young and being stupid and not having your shit together. But it's actually that sound of not having your shit together which people were kind of going for, you know. So we got signed to a publishing deal and a record deal and made the first single. So that's how I kind of got myself started in that world.
Okay. And did you always want to move to the States to pursue music too, or were you just getting tired of where you were in London?
London was actually a pretty groovy place back then, I have to say, and we even realized it at the time. We actually had a lot of fun. But well, I had two kind of love affairs with America. One was when I was about 5, I guess, being brought up in post-war England. The only stuff on TV were American war movies, basically. So you'd always see black and white, but you could tell that everybody was squinting. It was really sunny where they were, and where I was, the rain was just pissing down all the time.
Yeah.
And you looked at these guys, and they were like, they were smoking, and they had leather jackets on, and they had the girl, and they had the sun, you know. And I just immediately thought, I got to get to this place sooner or later. And in fact, when I first went to school, I think I lied to a couple of people and said, "Yeah, I'm from America." You know, you think you can get away with that stuff when you're 5. But then, in my teens, when I started playing and started reading music press, I'd read a lot about how British bands were going to America and discovering the wonders of America and how it was this paradise for bands, in very subtle ways. Like, for instance, I'd read that they'd go there and they'd do a tour and they'd do a deal with the Holiday Inns, and sometimes the rooms would get a bit trash, but the Holiday Inn saw the bigger picture.
Yep.
Not that I'm a big advocate of smashing rooms up, but you couldn't even get a sandwich after 11 o'clock in a British hotel, no matter how big the stadium was. You just sold out. So I kind of like that idea of it being it's an industry over there. And when I did get here, it really was. We went to SIR. Do you know what SIR is?
Not sure.
Well, it's been going for about 50 years. SIR is Studio Instrument Rentals in Manhattan, still the same thing. Okay. And they rent all the theaters and bands that go on tour. They set them up and send them out on tour. So that's one of the first places we went to. And it just seemed like such a cool thing. It's an industry. They don't laugh at it. You're not like, yeah, fuck off and get a job. It was like, yeah, okay, you're here for a business, and last week we had these guys, and next week we got these guys. And it was a total industry. So that's what attracted me to America. Because in England, as I said, your family doesn't take it seriously. They basically hear musician and they hear unemployed or don't want to work, basically, And it was all about when you're going to get a proper job and all that kind of thing. But maybe that was more the era. I'm not sure what it's like for kids growing up these days. But the post-war thing was definitely depressing. Everybody had to get a job, and hopefully one you didn't like. Then you'd fit right in, So where were we?
I was going to ask then, when you got to New York, what was your first professional gig?
Yeah. So when I was, I can't remember the age, in my early 20s, I think I was set up as a session musician.
Yep.
In London. When I say set up, it was pretty busy. Needed to be busier, but I was working pretty well, and I was working in all parts of the industry. Like I was even the guitarist in the BBC TV orchestra. We used to play a lot of Broadway and old-fashioned stuff. But I was doing really well, playing all kind of sessions. But I was kind of getting bored with my first wife, and kind of getting bored with sessions a little bit, believe it or not. That was like a cool gig, So I heard about this band, Greenslade, that I know had just had an album in the top 10 in England, and they were kind of a progressive rock band, and they needed a bass player, and I was a guitar player as a session player, but I did have a Rickenbacker bass under the bed. So I whipped it out, went to the audition, and got the gig. And the reason I was really interested in that gig was they were about to make their next album, so we'd be going straight into the studio, and then right after that album, they were going to do their first tour of America, Beijing. So I thought this couldn't have worked out better, you know.
Right.
So that's how I came to New York the first time in like 1974 with Green Slade, where we were touring, opening for Kraftwerk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. Um, so that was my first introduction to America, and yeah, and it went on from there.
Well, so when you were back in New York by yourself, what was the first solo like session gig that you got on your
Yeah.
own?
Well, it was complicated because honestly, I made a decision at one point that maybe I don't want to move here, because what I did was I moved here, and I had a rather troublesome spouse at that time, and so I was kind of dragged back here because it looked like I wasn't going to be able to work here. You know, when you come back here legitimately, you know, and you think, yeah, okay, I'll start in sessions. Well, you can't get into the union until you got a green card, and you can't get a green card until this and this and this. So it looked like I'm never going to get here. So I thought, screw this, I'm going to go back to England. So backwards and forwards, it's kind of boring. But when I did finally come back here, you understand, at this point now, in my mid-20s, 26, 27, I'd never had a job. I'd always been a musician, or
Right.
worked in the music business, or doing bands, or as a session player. So now I'm stuck in America, and I got to get a job. So first and only time in my life, I got a job as a waiter,
Mm.
and also as a paralegal selling do-it-yourself divorce kits. Yeah, I was pretty good at it. There's that saying they have in weddings when they say, "And let no man tear asunder."
Mm.
I tore asunder a couple of times. So, so I was doing that, and I was out in Long Island. Wasn't even New York City. I was really very depressed. And then the first gig that came along was playing bass for Ellen Foley.
Yep, that's why I figured it was.
Yeah, and that was through a little bit of nepotism, I have to admit. Once again, I get say that's the second thing in any advice to any people who want to start out is get yourself out there, and nepotism, which is, do you know somebody maybe, or somebody knows somebody else. So my wife at the time, the disastrous one, she had previously known Ian Hunter, and actually introduced Ian Hunter to his current wife. So I think we went up there and visited him, and I was just this guy who's like, I can see it from his point of view, just thinking, oh fuck, I got to hire this guy now, you know. And there was a definite kind of schism between me and Ian, because
Yep.
Ian's thing was very much kind of working class hero thing, and I was kind of like middle class progressive rock dude from college, you
Mhm.
know. So, but you know, he learned the error of his ways eventually. So I don't know whether he hired me as a favor or what, but the first thing that came along was Ellen Foley was making her first record, and Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson were going to produce it. So I auditioned for Ellen Foley, and she liked me, so I started playing with her band, and that was really the first gig, you know, like $25 a rehearsal. And so eventually we got to do the band, and then Ian and Mick came in and scrutinized us, and they thought everything was okay. So now we're doing the album. So now, for me, penniless, this is actually my first gig, join the union, and going to get paid. And so from that, I went from playing bass with Ellen to playing bass with Ian, because after we did the album, they figured I wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
And they just used the E Street Band for the Ian Hunter album that they were about to go out and promote. Never Alone with a Schizophrenic, I think it's called. And obviously they weren't going to tour with him, so they got stuck with me and the other guys. So we went out and toured, and I got to tell you, that's probably the most fun I've had in my life so far, those 2 years, because it was very devoid of responsibility. I was actually like a very, very competent musician, There's things we haven't mentioned that I'd written up to this time, like concept albums and all this kind of progressive stuff. And
Yeah.
here I was playing in a 7-piece rock and roll band where my job was really just to play fours, roots on the bass and just keep it dead steady, which is actually quite an interesting job, just concentrating on that precision. But it was for me a pretty easy gig, and it was pre-AIDS.
Yeah.
And I'm in a band that's very much associated with glam rock and makeup, and Mick Ronson's hanging around, and he can only fuck so many women a night, you know. So it was a kind of interesting 2 years. We got like the backstage crowd we used to get was always interesting. A lot of what we used to call Black Widow women,
Oh.
and some of them were actually very nice. So during that 2 years, I really kind of felt like a failure, because I think at this point I was maybe 29, 30, and I'd had a whole burst in my career, which we didn't even discuss. Because right after I did that single for EMI, I actually worked for George Martin for a couple of years and did an album for George Martin. And it was kind of a big deal, you know, to get that, like to come home and tell your mum that the most famous producer in the world wants to do a record with me, mum, so take that, you know.
Right.
And that's say to my brother and my sister, take that. But you know, it was like a very early on in my career, and then it kind of fizzled out and went nowhere. It was my first lesson that in a good long career there are a lot of shelved albums, but the first one is a total heartbreak, and you think it's the end. But so all that stuff had already happened before I even went into Ian's thing, you know. So now I was, and then I was in a progressive rock band with very complicated music, playing with guys from King Crimson and all this kind of stuff. And but now I'm in a rock and roll band playing. You know, I loved it. I loved the music. It was like beautiful simplicity, but it was very simple. And so I felt like a kind of a failure, that maybe I was washed up, like my best years were maybe behind me, possibly, you know. So I kind of dedicated myself to being kind of a burnout sideman for a couple of years, and didn't write very much at all. And those 2 years were basically me touring and making albums with Ian Hunter and Ellen Foley, and it just kept spreading out. And went over to Europe, and you know, it was an interesting time, fun, responsible, less time. So when it was grinding to an end, I could see Ian needed a break. He wasn't going to be touring anymore. Ellen Foley had kind of fizzled out, and it wasn't really leading to anything else in terms of sidemen work, which I was quite happy to look for, but it wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So my crazy wife at the time had spent everything I'd made on the road, and we had maybe $60 left. Thousands of soft furnishings. So through my association with Ian, I did know one publishing company, which is Chrysalis Publishing. And so in that period with Ian, I'd written 2 songs and demoed them, and I played them to Chrysalis Publishing, and they described them as 5-minute long suicidal dirges. And could I write something happy and 3.5 minutes long?
Yeah.
So with $60 in the bank, I said, yeah, what, like by tomorrow? And they went, no, take your time. And so I went home and wrote a song for Pat Benatar, who was on that same label.
Yeah.
She didn't want to do it, but Carla DeVito wanted to do it, who was the second Meatloaf girl, I think, who had her own solo album. So I immediately got a cut, and Chrysalis Records were really impressed and said, do that again. So I think I did it again with maybe Barry Manilow or something equally ridiculous. And so then they said, okay, all right, well, we better offer you an actual publishing deal. So they offered me this terrible deal, which naturally I signed immediately, and on we went from there. And so then they said, you know, those miserable songs you brought in, you could probably be an artist with that stuff. I mean, this is literally the conversation. And said, we'll find you a manager. So they found me a manager, Mike Lembo, who listened and felt the same way, and they all suggested I write more songs in that vein. The 2 songs they had that they mentioned originally were Heart of Life and One Step Behind, both of which appeared on my first album,
Right.
and
Yeah.
both of which received like incredible critical acclaim for weird reasons. But it's kind of weird. It goes from like Suicidal Dirge to something else. So anyway, eventually, you know, I kept writing this stuff, and we got a deal with Mercury Records,
Yep.
based on all this miserable stuff that I was writing. And in honor of it being called Miserable, I actually decided my first publishing company was going to be called Miserable Melodies, which, amusing to me, turned out to be printed on the back of a Barry Manilow record.
Yeah.
So, so we did the record with Mercury. Is this more than you need to know? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm actually, out of your 3 solo albums back then, I like the first one the most.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a syndrome, you know, when you like bottle up an artist for a number of years, they just accumulate all these fantastic ideas, then you give them an album and blah, that's what you get. And what happens, unfortunately, in the real world is a label like Mercury, for them, they never told me, but this was really kind of a demo for the board of directors. You know, it was my first record. And I poured my soul into this on a pretty limited budget, and they completely ignored it. It was like they kept saying, "Well, no, it's not that we ignored it. It's just we just wanted to see what you had, you know." And then they picked up my option, and I thought, "No, don't pick up the option. I don't want to do this for you again. In fact, I don't want to do it for anybody again. I think I've just lost every idea I had, and that's the syndrome that you do feel on a first album. You feel like you just blow the wad, you know." And the weird thing that happened then was because there was no promotion, quite visibly, all the critics, who are usually bombarded with promotion by the major labels, they look at my little thing and they start listening to it and they go, "We love this," and they probably love it because it's not being heavily promoted, and I'm the underdog. So the press now is like, I'm the next Dylan and all this kind of stuff, you know. Unfortunately, Mercury read that same press, which is why they picked up the option. And also a lot of other people, like good labels that I'd like to be with, like A&M at the time, they would like to get a look in, but it wasn't happening. As you know, the way it works with record labels is they pick up the option, not you.
Yep.
They got the power, whether you like it or not. So that's how I got picked up for the next record. And I thought, well, fuck this, I got no ideas, but there's an advance coming. I'll live on that until I have to admit that I've got no ideas.
Right.
So I just scraped around and did come up with some ideas, and all very post-divorce ideas. And that one had the hit record. In a way, it was kind of destined. Like, I think they could have done the same thing with the first record if they'd really wanted to, but now it's time. It's the second record. Because on the second record, they're all the A&R people and their wives and mistresses and aunties and uncles. They're all like taking votes on should it be this song or that song, between about 4 or 5 songs.
Yeah.
And it ended up being Salt in My Tears. Could have been one of the others, you know. But that's the one they chose, and the way this goes with these corporations is like a bloody great ship. Once that bloody great ship starts surging in a particular direction, you can't really stop it, you know.
Right.
And so everybody's on board, and it does the thing, you know.
I actually wanted to ask about the first album again. Did you have the idea for the cover art?
The cover art, yes.
And the title?
Well, I always start with the titles because I always like the idea of evocative song titles and album titles. And I have I was, as I say, I went to art school and I was supposed to be a graphic designer, but I went that way instead. But when I became an artist, and back then the records were this big, and it was like a lot of space to just waste on some stupid idea.
Yeah.
So I immediately got involved with the art departments, much to their disgust. Kept waking them up from naps and things. And basically what I did with the first one, I just said, look, this is what I want. I want something very surrealistic, possibly Magritte-ish. So give me bring me the portfolios of artists. And I went through about 20 artists and found Norman Walker, whose stuff I liked, and met with Norman Walker, kind of almost like a musical. meeting you'd have with the producer, and kind of fill him in on all the subjects and the titles and the lyrics, and show him some of the lyrics to give him an idea of the feel of the record, you know.
Right.
Which, I don't know, maybe he didn't want, but I gave it to him anyway. And so he came up with what he came up with, which was okay. There it is. It doesn't really make sense, actually, if you look at the shadows. You know, the world doesn't work like that. But I liked it. He came up with it pretty quick. And it was all about having my name very big on it as well, because I thought it was my first record. I got to stick that out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the question about that. Yeah, and that's how I did all the other albums as well, because I figured I can't leave this stuff alone. Although these guys had their jobs at the record companies, and you could tell I was threatening them a little bit. Got to be careful with that. So I tiptoed through that a little bit, but ultimately I think I became I got the credit as art director on the second and the third records, both which were nominated for Grammy Awards.
Oh yeah.
And the funny story about that is, when I got the second one, I think I called my mother in England and said, I've been nominated for a Grammy Award for this thing now. Isn't that incredible? And she goes, now, you see, you got nominated for the art. You should have stuck with the art, like I told you. Thank you, Mum. So, maybe she was right. But anyway, so that's what happened with the first one. The second one got nominated for a Grammy, and the third one too, which I didn't like the third one that much. But the second one was the same thing. I met with the artist in Los Angeles and showed him all the lyrics, and he spent like 20 minutes reading through the lyrics, because it was pretty kind of gloomy, post-divorce sort of stuff, you know, which gave us that lighting, that purpley kind of lighting. But yeah, I like doing it like that. It just seemed like bringing in people as part of the team, the art team, whether it's art or music, you know.
Yeah.
And he did the third one as well.
Because I'm a big fan of horror, so that's kind of what made me gravitate to the first album too. When I was first discovering it, was, you know, this is like this eerie thing that you're not seeing anywhere else on album covers at the time.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you know, photorealism, which is what I was most into, is kind of a redundant art form now. Now we have computers.
Yeah.
Photorealism was invented when we didn't have computers, but it was about artists who, using photographs, could do the most stunning artwork that just looked like photographs. And because it's not photographs, it can do anything you want. You know, it can make people's heads go through the ceiling. And that's been reproduced a few times. I've seen it on, probably illegally. I've seen it on people's sweatshirts sometimes.
Yeah.
Like going through the pool. And also on the original, you know, the guy's got his hands out like this. Original, I think there is stigmata on the hands. You know what stigmata is?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang on a second. Anyway, what was I saying?
Stigmata on the...
Stigmata, yeah. That thing, because I think originally that guy was probably taken from Dali's Crucifixion.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know the guy I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, hang on again. I just realised it's been bugged on. Stigmata, yeah, right, that, and what else was nasty about that? No, that's pretty much it. You know, it was kind of funny when we did the video for Salt My Tears. We went to England to do it for a budgetary reason, and it was funny when we walked into the set. It was so like this, and it turns out they got a little teeny photograph of just the corner of the set of where she was sitting, and they'd made the rest up, and it was just like exactly like the room. There was even like a little photograph of a girl that looked like my daughter from the divorce.
Oh.
And there was all kind of things like the script, for instance, which I didn't write, because I thought it was a little bit Benny Hill. But in the script, in the bridge part of the song, I'm in a kind of a dream sequence, and I'm surrounded by dream girls, kind of ugly dream girls. And then I reach up the chimney in my deserted apartment, and I pull out cash. And the thing that was funny about that was, in the actual divorce that this song was written afterwards, that dragged on for like 2 years, there was a whole thing about my hidden fortune, which didn't exist and never did. But that was in the script, and I thought, oh, this will be so funny. And what actually happened was, because, you know, when you're doing this, you don't know where this thing's going, but it ends up being a hit video, and it's all on MTV for a couple of years. But what ends up happening is the real ex-wife, or as they would call her on MTV, the real bitch of a wife, because they said, "Poor look at," because they would just talk about the action. They would just say, "Look at that, poor old Martin Briley got screwed by that bitch of a wife," you know. Meanwhile, the actual bitch of a wife is at home watching MTV, wondering why she's being called a bitch, and wondering why she didn't check the fireplace.
Right.
It all got a little bit strange. And you know, the thing about that video was I had some kind of food poisoning where I was just too weak and faint to stand up. So by the time I got to the studio at like 6 in the morning there, and they're telling me I got to do this and this, and I said, "Hey, listen, can I just like sit here and you like do the whole thing around me?" And he went, "Yeah, sure, we could do that. You'll be nonchalant." And that's exactly what I became. I just kind of sat there and let it all go around me, to the extent where there were women in the business in New York that didn't like me. They thought I was a misogynist because of the way I was acting
Oh.
in that thing. And not only did they think I was a misogynist, but some Hell's Angels thought I was a misogynist as well. But they liked that about me. And one guy came up to me at one point when I was in a club, and it was when I was very paranoid, because when you have fame, when you're not that famous, you're not famous enough to be in a limo. You're famous, but you're on a subway. So, you know, I'm getting harassed all the time. So I'm in this nightclub with my managers, two big guys, about 600 pounds between the two of them. And I'm feeling kind of safe watching this band playing on stage downstairs. I'm in the balcony. Suddenly, big hand on my shoulder. And as I turn to look around, I catch my manager's eyes. And the eyes all said, "You are on your own." And I look up and I see a Hell's Angel. And he's grabbed me with his left hand. His right hand is a hook. You can't write this stuff. It's a fucking hook. And he's grabbing me by the left hand, and he kind of lifts me up like this. He screams in my ear about the music, "I like the way you treat women."
Wow.
Yeah, the price of fame. Who knew? Who knew? So anyway, sorry, I digress a little there, but it's all part of one big story.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask too, were the songs that you wrote for Pat Benatar and Carla DeVito, "I'm Just Using You" and "Take It Any Way You Want It," were those always meant for other artists, or did you record those, like, were you going to record those for one of the albums?
No, they were specifically written for those artists.
Okay.
And you know, the way it works in songwriting is you aim for Pat Benatar, you get Carla DeVito. And no matter what the year is, you aim for the top artist. There's always another 2 or 3 artists that want to be that artist and will take that song. But you aim high, send it to them first, and they turn it down. You offer it to these people, and down you go. But yeah, they would definitely, you know, we use female vocalists on the demo.
Okay.
And back then, you know, you couldn't just switch it in the computer. You kind of just set me on that key, it's female, and you send it off. So yeah, that was very specific, which I kind of enjoyed. Very specific writing for a specific artist, which is you know, a discipline that needs to be learned, and you realize that as soon as you give it a go.
Yeah, because one thing that really turned me on to paying attention to the songs that you were writing is that I'm more attracted to like darker, edgier songwriters from back then.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that you were like one of the main people that was actively doing that, and was really good at it too.
Being dark, you mean?
Yeah, like it being edgier and.
Yeah, I know. And the funny thing was, you know, my second publisher, MCA, they were very into the idea of me bringing that into co-writing with mainstream artists. And it was kind of stupid. It wasn't really going to work. You know, I wrote with Kenny Loggins, and you know, when you write for other artists, you either do it with them in the room, where you can ask them a direct question: do you hate this lyric? Or you mail it somewhere else, and you mail it in, and you pray and wonder what's going to happen. You know, it's hard to change that stuff a lot. And for me, it was very kind of a schizophrenic experience, because all the stuff that I wrote for the albums was all written by me only. And it wasn't because it was being greedy or egotistical. It was just convenience. It was just, I know what I want to do. It's so complicated to explain to some other idiot. Let me just do this, and I'll get what I want. And it was only actually by the time I got to the third album that the publishers were really encouraging me to co-write. You know, it was for them. It was some other way of making money for other people and all this stuff.
Mhm.
But that was always hard. And by contrast, whenever I wrote for other artists, I would religiously write with a co-writer.
Okay.
Very often, very often somebody who I could see had experience in that neighborhood already.
Yep.
You know, like I wrote a song for Five Star in England. It was a top 10 dance hit. I can't write dance music, but I wrote with a guy who had a great sounding little setup at the time in the 80s, and he was known. He did a couple of dance hits, and so I kind of latched onto that. Same thing with the Barry Manilow thing. I wrote with this kind of goofy Connecticut sort of Harvard guy who'd written lots of sloppy ballads before, you know, and I'd never really written one before. So I wrote with him and it got there, you know. And I can't tell whether my edge was in any of these things. I don't think it was. But some people say, no, no, even the stuff that you think isn't you, it's kind of you.
Yeah.
But
That's
it
kind of what I
was
think too.
really hard to bring that stuff into mainstream music, whatever that stuff was, you know. But at my darkest, um, on the first album, and you know, a lot of is got, I got to say, is some of it's to do with drugs, because at that time, after being on tour with Ian a bit, you know, I was definitely abusing myself a bit, and you can get into very dark places sometimes.
Yeah.
And also, when you're in that destructive place where I really didn't think I had a future, and I would take all kinds of risks with my health and my safety, and you tend to have strange ideas going through your head, and strange words come out of that. Um, and like on the first album, there's a song called Heart of Life, which is one of those 5 minute long suicidal dirges.
Yep.
That song was kind of like a project for me. I thought, let me write a song about three different women, and the third one was the person I was with at the time, and the third verse, in which I kind of spoke to her, was basically a little verse about euthanasia.
Oh.
Not an easy thing to sell to Kenny Loggins or any of those other artists I was working with. But I remember the lyric was, when I'm old and I'm giving in, saliva trickling down my chin, lying in a bed of piss and crumbs, would you wait until the darkness comes?
Yeah.
Too weak to hold a fork and spoon, too dumb to recognize the room, would you pull the plug and cut the juice? Free the mind if the body ain't no use. You know, it's basically saying, do you love me enough to pull the plug on me, you know?
Right.
But kind of a fancier way. Yeah, I didn't get too many covers on that song, I can tell you.
I actually have the MP3s of First to Know, Slipping Away, and then there's one more song from the first album I have MP3s of on my phone that I like have on shuffle. But yeah, those are the
How flattering. How flattering.
Those
So
are two.
you live in the past, basically, do you?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot more fun than the present, I think. There's
Yeah.
a lot more there to choose from. There's so much stuff that came out of the
Right.
70s, the 80s. I mean, God, one of the reasons I attribute my minimal success to was that I was in a very, very crowded generation. There were tons of great people, and
Mhm.
there's only, you know, in the top 20, there's only 20 places. So, yeah, that's kind of what happens.
So, and then in the later part of the 80s, how did you meet Michael Bolton and Celine Dion?
Okay, never met Celine Dion.
Oh, you
Don't
did. Okay.
you want to? Yeah, yeah. You don't actually get to meet most of the people you write songs for.
Hmm.
Um, as I said, there's two ways of writing songs for other artists. You mail them in, or you get to be with the artist. There are
Yeah.
pros and cons to both. Obviously, if you get along with the artist and you finish a song, everybody's happy because the artist's publisher now has a little stake in the whole thing, so that makes everybody happy. The artist himself has a stake in it, you know, rather than just taking an outside song.
Yeah.
Artistically, it can be good because you can really get straight answers and know what's going to fly and what's not going to fly. Artistically, it's also grueling because very often these people fill the whole room up. You know, you just got to let them fill the room up. It's all about them and their ego, and Michael Bolton, no exception. I actually wrote about 10 songs with Michael Bolton. Two of them ended up on his album that broke his career. There was another one we wrote for Greg Allman.
Yep.
But very often people wouldn't want to cut the songs we wrote because Michael would oversell the song with his vocals. People go, oh, I can't do that song. I can't sing like that. You know, so you can you can definitely go over the top of those things.
Mhm.
But Michael Bolton, I met at some kind of awards show, and we got on really well. We have a very similar sense of humor. But he's a real star fucker, basically. You know, I doubt if I could get him on the phone anymore. Um, and as I say, Celine Dion, somebody you'd never really get to meet. I don't particularly approve of people like Celine Dion and the way they make money by
Oh.
screwing songwriters,
Mhm.
which they do. Like, for instance, what they'll do is there was a point in Celine Dion's career where their management turned to all the songwriters that have songs on hold, 16 of us, and they said, okay, listen, we only need 10 songs for this album. The 10 that get the final cut be the ones that cough up part of this publishing.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's like, how fucking rich do you need to be?
Right.
Anyway, so never mind. So Celine Dion for me was a hollow victory. It's the thing you have to get because, like, it's right over there on the wall there. Sold like 8 million copies.
Mhm.
But it's you know, I honestly, writing for artists that don't write for themselves. So what am I doing? I never listen to these people. I listen to artists who write their own songs.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not interested in listening to people who would who would do my songs. What do I want to hear that for?
Mhm.
So you know, if I got a song on an Eric Clapton album, I'd feel a lot more happy.
Yeah.
Uh,
What's your opinion of the songs that you did for Jeff Healey and yeah, and Kenny Loggins too? True Confessions, I think. That's what it was.
I never think about those songs ever again. I'm sad that I've started to write songs for dead people now because Jeff Healey is no longer with
Right.
us.
Yeah.
But honestly, I would rarely admit this, but I don't do interviews anymore, so what the hell. But I look back on most of my past and I'm disappointed with it.
Oh, okay.
Could have done better, I think.
Do you feel like that about your solo stuff, or is that mainly with songs that you wrote for other artists?
Mainly songs I wrote for other artists.
Yeah.
But you know, even the stuff I wrote for myself, it was a weird situation. I mean, not many people will be able to understand this, but I've tried to avoid fame through my entire musical career because I'm shy and I don't like being the center of attention.
Hmm.
And it was never the thing on top of my list. Got to be a rock star. It was, whereas Michael Bolton had to be a rock star. As I said to him many times, you better become famous because nobody is going to deal with your shit otherwise. Because he's such a pain in the ass. So me, I never really wanted to be that guy in the center. I just wanted to be working, busy, engaged, challenged, always moving ahead, moving forward. Um, the drag about being an artist is you kind of get stuck in the mud a little bit. You're stuck with that guy now for a while. Got to
Hmm.
keep writing for that guy. And if that guy's song becomes famous, you might be stuck with it for fucking decades, whether you like it or not. So it's, you know, I enjoy the fluidity of writing for other artists, but in actual fact, in truth, I didn't want to be a recording artist, and I was left with no choice.
Hmm.
This sounds crazy, but after I finished touring with Ian, I thought I would just get more gigs as a sideman and not have to think too much because I figured, you know, I'm past my writing epicenter, although I hadn't actually got into it yet. But I felt like I was past it, so I didn't want to do the artist thing. And so when the thing came up with the record deal, and I kept playing along because I figured, well, the worst that can happen is I'll get like an advance and I'll be set for a year if I
Yeah.
get an artist deal. And honestly, that's all I was thinking about.
Hmm.
I didn't never thought about it because I thought the upside of it is that I get famous and I've got to stand on a fucking stage and sweat my bollocks off for this because I just spent 2 years standing behind Ian Hunter watching him literally sweat his balls off to try and get a rise out of these audiences, and I'm
Hmm.
standing at the back there playing my bass thinking I never fucking want to do that, you know. So and then 2 years later it was like, okay, well, you got an artist deal, and I thought, well, okay, I'll take it. It won't go anywhere. And
Hmm.
so I did the first record, and I was right. Didn't fucking go anywhere. And then they picked the thing up, and they go, oh, well, that won't go anywhere either. I'll take the advance. So then, when Salt in My Tears comes out, and it's going up the charts, I'm going, no, stop, stop. I actually did a few things to like sabotage my career. I would turn up for MTV interviews completely out of my box, and because I was trying to find some way of slowing it down. I figured I can handle this if it comes on a little slower, but it's too fast. Um, but there's nothing you can do about that. It just happens.
But what about did you still feel did you still have all those same feelings when you appeared on shows like Solid Gold and
Yes.
perform? Yeah.
I mean, you look around and you think, wow, I never thought my song would be interpreted in dance like this. It just felt like a huge joke. I just assumed it was all going to go and nosedive sooner, right? And it did. You know, what happened by the time I got to the third album, Dangerous Moments, they now insisted I have to have the most famous producer we can get hold of. So I went for Trevor Horn. He was into it, but it was going to be a 2-year wait. They weren't going for that. So who was available? Bloody Phil Ramone, who I'd heard of him. You know, I'd listened to some records of his 10 years ago when I was into Paul Simon, but,
Yeah.
you know, not known for its sonic quality. And he was very old-fashioned. Met with him, and he came up with some very strange expressions like sweetening. That's like from the Frank Sinatra days. And
Hmm.
it was a fucking nightmare. It was a $750,000 nightmare.
Wow.
I couldn't wait for it to end, and I couldn't wait to not be an artist anymore. It was just grueling. So when it finished, I found out, even though I hated the record, hated the songs, I found out that they just hired a guy at the record company. Forgot his name now, so unimportant. But anyway, he was head of singles promotion and a coke fiend megalomaniac, and hated my manager.
Oh.
That's it. That's it. That's all she wrote. So from there on, he was walking around the label boasting how he was burying my record. So, you know, I'd meet people in the road, in the street, and they go, "Oh, sorry about your album not doing so well. What happened? Did you run out of ideas?" And I go, "No, it's just from two executives bickering as usual." And
Right.
that's what sunk it. And I couldn't have given a shit at the time. I was so looking forward to go back into writing songs where you get into it, you spend a week on it, you do the demo, and it fuck off, and you move on to something else.
Hmm.
So, you know, it was no skin off my nose really. I was never meant to be doing it anyway, so there you go. I mean, I just wasn't the star material, you know. The star, like the kind of people that can make albums and write about what they feel, which I did for 3 albums almost. That they
Right.
can some people can do it for 10 albums.
Hmm.
I had like no respect for people like Sting. Then he's like as tedious as he can get. He manages to keep coming up with shit for like 10 albums or something. I
Hmm.
just couldn't see me doing it, you know.
Hmm.
So it all worked out for the best.
I know right after the well, yeah, 84 or 83, you played on Bonnie Tyler's album.
Yeah, I think I'm in that mix somewhere. Yeah.
Do you remember much about it?
Yeah, it was Jim Steinman.
Yep.
You know, he's a very famous producer, still on the radio with some of his atrocious melodies, but um, he was famous for being a bit of a glutton. So when he would run a session in the studio, he'd be working all day, all night, and he would have a whole catering spread out from all the top French restaurants in New York City. So I was really looking forward to that. I wasn't that hungry when I got there, but the spread was very, very impressive. But also the other way he worked back then, and this is in the days of 24-inch tape or
Yep.
2 of 48, if you want to go that far. But he would think of multiple arrangements and couldn't really decide on which was the best one. Now most of us who have a budget just say, make it that one.
Hmm.
He left his options open by creating whole productions of that same song and then reducing it down to 2 tracks, which came up as 2 faders on the mixer.
Uh,
So there's
mhm.
that arrangement, there's this arrangement, or there's this one, or there's this one. And when he showed me, he'd already done 5 arrangements of what we were doing. And I was doing all these cascading Queen-like guitars and stuff. I can't hear it in there. It might be in there. I got paid. That's the important thing, and I got the credit. But
Right.
I may have been part of the Faders Down group. You just don't know.
I think that would have been interesting to hear some kind of collaboration with your songwriting specifically and him. I think that might have been interesting.
Yeah, you know, I wish it had have gone further. To be honest, I was a bit snooty back then.
Hmm.
And or maybe not snooty, maybe I was still shy and just wasn't used to pushing myself into things. I can think of so many situations I blew just by being shy or pissed off at some. Like, for instance, I remember during the making of the Phil Ramone record, I was so pissed off at Phil Ramone that whenever he tried to cheer me up by doing something like he you know Julian Lennon was making the record next door, so
Yep.
in the other studio, so I played solo on the Too Late for Goodbyes thing. They tried to reciprocate, but honestly Julian Lennon didn't do anything that well. So that didn't happen. But that was really done to try and sweeten the mood a little bit, because he knew I was so pissed off him. And the other things he would do, he would say, "Oh, I got Billy Joel coming in to meet you." I said, "Oh, fuck off," you know. And so I really should have paid attention. And he did the same thing with Paul Simon. And I love Paul Simon. When they both came in, I was in a terrible mood, and I basically ignored them, you know. So
Wow.
so things like that happen, you know. Not the
Were you
best.
not so were you not really a fan of anything that was, you know, kind of on the radio in the 80s? Or what,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
were you?
Can't remember what it was, but I liked all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
I liked Paul Simon. I listened to a couple of his albums very intently. Would have liked to spoke to him, but it was right after some other nasty thing that had happened at the studio, so I just wasn't in the mood.
Hmm.
Anyway. So
Well, I think
yeah.
like one of the last things I can say is just I think that the music from your solo albums holds up really well, and it's, you know, songwriting that I still pay attention to, because I know when the first time that I played tracks off your first album for my mom, she thought that it was something by Genesis.
Yeah, the voice thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, so you've heard that before?
Yeah. In fact, I've got on. You know, do you know what the Mercury Years is? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
You obviously don't own it. The it's designed like a book, like a used book
Yeah,
from a
I knew
library.
that.
On the back, like a book, it has quotes about the writer, about the book, but it's not really. They're actually bad quotes about me, about insulting things people have said about me.
Mhm.
And one of them was some person said, I don't think Phil Collins' mum could tell the difference between the two of them on the telephone." And whatever. It's no big deal. Yeah, the Genesis, but you know, it could be worse. You could be being compared to Quiet Riot or something. You know, something awful. At least they were decent people I was being compared with. You know,
Yeah. Well, thank you.
the only advice I would give songwriters is be careful of synthesizers. Looking back on a career of making records, uh, it's always the bloody synthesizers that make the thing not timeless.
Yeah,
Thing
that's
that
true.
ties it down to that suddenly you see like a certain kind of genes when you hear a certain kind of synthesizer. So you have to use them very, 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 very carefully.
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun, and it was nice to talk to someone I've been a fan of for a long time.
Pleasure. Hope you get something out of it.
Yeah, I definitely did. Thanks.
All right.